I think when you take a step back and you reflect on it, I guess creator marketing is at an inflection point.
Yeah.
You know, creators are no longer fighting for attention; they're winning it.
We should be seeing content from people more often than we're seeing content from brands.
Great intro.
We sound quite impressive, don't we?
When we're talking about owning that holistic ecosystem, like that's the stuff that brands, I think, are really recognizing there's an opportunity to do that. I think as an industry, we've just got to help simplify that, create the right infrastructure, the right governance to make that all possible.
And if you think about bring, build, boost, you've got in that a system that is repeatable, it's connected, and it's scalable. So we are more generally talking about making influencer investable. I think things like this raise the ceiling and they broaden out the walls, if you like, and it becomes a more investable channel as a result.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier on with the predictable science, right?
Yeah.
And this is, you know, important. Partners like yourselves are a massive part of this within the creator economy, right? Of being able to kind of validate everything Tom just said, but with the specific data points that, okay, so who are the specific micro creators that we can forecast and ultimately predict are going to help deliver a specific business outcome. That's going to be really cool when we get to that. You know, we've got, as an industry, I think, some work to do to collectively to really help prove and scale that out. But I think we're on that journey.
There's maybe like an undertone to it of like conviction. So that is like conviction to make one call, and like it's the defensibility, the confidence thing, the predictable science really needs to be rigorous enough to be able to make one decision. So if we were to answer, how does influence go from bolt-on to built-in? Would the keywords be predictable science?
I would go with that.
I
think that's where we've netted out on this one.
I love that. Hello, hello, hello. We are here with Chris Mills, Senior Social and Creator Enablement Agency Lead at Google, and Tom Cornish, Global VP of Group Solutions at Goat, on the ThisThat Can podcast. This year's theme is Making Influence Investable, and today we're talking about how influence goes from bolt-on to built-in. A year ago on this yacht, I asked Claire Morris, your colleague, what it would take for influence to stop being a bolt-on. Since then, the IPA came out and called it Influencer is the most effective channel. Unilever had done a 20x bet, and that is now real. YouTube has the infrastructure. Goat has the scale, one of ThisThat's earliest partners. Yet, unlocking 8 to 9 figure budgets remains a big challenge. Today I want to hear why from two people closest to it and what it takes to build the governing system that makes influence investable. Chris, 11 years at Google, on a mission to get YouTube on every media plan, part of YouTube and WPP partnership, a champion of frameworks the industry is starting to use, such as Bring, Build, Boost, and Discover, Create, Measure. And Tom, Global VP of Group Solutions at Goat, the world's largest influence marketing agency, over 650 people across 37 different markets, now part of WPP Media, launched the human media revolution and influence everywhere. Between the two of you, you represent the infrastructure and the execution layer of our industry. Nobody should know more about how influence goes from bolt-on to built-in.
Great intro.
Yeah. We sound quite impressive, don't we? Yeah.
I'm really excited to have both of you on. We've got 4 parts. We'll be going through the human media revolution. We'll go through Bring, Build, and Boost, as well as Discover, Create, Measure, and then Influence Everywhere Needs. We'll unpack what that is. We've got a fun rapid fire this or that question at the end, all building on one question: how does influence go from a bolt-on to a built-in, and what it takes to build a governing system that makes influence investable. Starting off with part 1, the human media revolution. Goat launched the human media revolution. Please, could you unpack?
Well, the human media revolution is made up of 2 themes that are going on at the same time, essentially. The first is that everyone is now realizing, and I think if you go up the closet there, you'll hear it, that humans make the best content. It's the content that's more believable, it holds attention. I mean, see the last 10 years of what everybody sitting here has been saying. But that kind of realization is bedding in. And the second piece is that as the ability to personalize media becomes more sophisticated, AI-driven systems and data-driven, you've got the ability to tell very, very specific stories in a very targeted way using human content. So the human media revolution is essentially the idea that we go from a kind of top-down single message that spreads as far as we can to putting human content front and center in how brands communicate with their audiences. And we call it a revolution because ultimately the power in the system moves. So it moves from the kind of big brand advertising position into the community relevance position. And that's what's so exciting for us. And it allows us to tell so many more stories in such a more interesting and compelling way that we're really interested in it, obviously, and clients are starting to come around to it too.
Something you said there reminded me of a phrase that Aaron, one of the co-founders of Goat, used to say a lot. Influencer marketing is niche content at scale.
Yes, that's
that
right. Niche content to niche audiences at scale.
That's right, yes.
Aaron, if you're watching, I hope I got that right. Yeah, it is a development of that exact principle. And influencer marketing in its infancy, since its infancy, has always been about this. The idea that you can tell a more specific message from somebody who is more relevant to the audience, and it will generate a better result. What we're sort of layering on now, particularly our position within WPP Media, is that this very, very advanced global sort of omni-channel system for identifying audiences through media connects to that. So it's no longer just about an influencer that I might follow or an influencer on a platform that I might go to. And this comes on to influence everywhere, which is another kind of key principle, that we should be seeing content from people more often than we're seeing content from brands, because Chris and I have a lot in common, but we are different. And if a digital media targeting system understands how we're different and what he likes and what I like and what platforms he's on and what platforms I'm on, why on earth would a brand service the same content? So it's the ability to take the data, take the insight that you've got and tell different stories to different people, and then you invest in that. And that becomes the primary model, the primary mechanism for communicating with an audience.
You touched on cultural relevance. When we've spoken previously, you spoke about cultural moments.
Yeah.
Could you unpack that? What does that look like in practice on YouTube?
I think if you reflect on YouTube as a platform, YouTube in the modern days, right now is the epicenter of culture, right? And we're seeing that in so many forms, from Justin Bieber at Coachella, the Sidemen selling out Wembley Stadium in under 3 hours, all of the content that's just spiraling across the World Cup. Like, there's so many relevant moments, and YouTube as a platform is just such a fundamental part of culture. And we're hearing it a lot this week. Is like, a lot of marketers are really waking up to the fact that we're going beyond the experiment, and we're going into a stage of how can we own a cultural moment? How do we surround ourselves with creators, take over specific channels and really own that on the platform? And I think we're seeing this in so many different ways. It's like the platform is really evolving with this as well. If you look at AI, consumer journeys, you look at the evolution of creators, the content, we're calling this the new era of YouTube. And I think when you start to combine that with the kind of cultural impact, I loved this example the other day. A brand come to me and was like, how do we own tennis? And I was like, I love that. How do we own tennis? We can do that. We work very closely with partners to be able to execute and work together on the strategy of, taking creators to specific, tennis events. You can also do channel takeovers on YouTube. And all of a sudden, you can start to work with specific tennis podcasters like Andy Roddick, for example, you then basically work with them on integrations. And there's so many creative ways that we can suddenly own a cultural moment. And I think that is, in meetings I've been in this week, that's the part of, like, we're going beyond the experiment and at that real deep cultural integration, and recognizing that YouTube is at the forefront of that, I think is really exciting.
Does this change how brands should show up? And if so, how would you articulate that?
I think it completely changes how brands should show up. The thing that the platforms who are really switched onto this are understanding, if you take it right back to the basics, is that humans want to see human content. So you need as much human content out there as possible because it's telling better stories. And so it's in everybody's interest. Everybody wins if humans tell the story and produce the content rather than the brands. There will always be a kind of two-voice model, obviously, because brands want to communicate and it's important they own certain messaging. But I think the shift really will be from seeing creators as a kind of an accompaniment to what the brand is really about, to creators and human voices becoming the primary medium of communication, and the brand sort of backs it with a core of really fundamental content. It's another big part of the work that we do with partners, is to help brands integrate the creator voice into what they're doing. So obviously talking about being investable, which is the big theme for this series, it can be difficult for brands to separate budget and say, okay, I'm going to say this with my TV ad and they're going to say that with their creator content, and it's going to go a little bit over here and a little bit over there, formats. So what we really want to do is be able to work with partners, bring all of that together. That question, how do we own tennis? Your answer to that can be, here's your brand ad, here's your partner property with the tour or whatever, with an event, here's some professional tennis people, here's some tennis super fans, and here's 1,000 people who just love tennis. And it's all wrapped together in a story. If you think about how do you own tennis, that's how you own tennis. It's not, the Rolex logo behind you at Wimbledon, which has worked because obviously I remember it, but owning it in the future, in this new era, which Chris is talking about, is about being much more multifaceted in who's telling the story.
Yeah, I think as well, like what's really exciting is when you start to integrate that with a paid media strategy and with the development of AI and AI-powered formats, at Google, YouTube, but in the industry as well, is like we're now able to accelerate that content into completely new environments. I mean, we see this, at the moment with Google, right? To be able to put creator content through the connected TV, working with shorts, and when we're talking about owning moments, again, this is when we're talking about owning that holistic ecosystem. Like that's the stuff that brands, I think, are really recognizing there's an opportunity to do that. I think as an industry, we've just got to help simplify that, create the right infrastructure, the right governance to make that all possible.
I like this example of tennis, and I think we can keep coming back to this because in the next parts we'll go through different frameworks, and I'd love to see sort of how this shows up in practice. I think we start off with bring, build, boost. The YouTube and WPP partnership is proof that it works at scale. Could you walk us through it? Yeah.
So I guess let's be honest. There's lots of components to creator marketing, right? And at YouTube we've really focused to try and simplify that. And working with partners and everyone in the industry is recognizing that now we're at a point at YouTube where we've been building the right infrastructure, the right partnerships, and ultimately for us it's making creator partnerships more efficient and easier than ever to access. So having these frameworks is really important for us, and I think for the industry. So the bring component at the start is ultimately recognizing that there's a huge opportunity of there's content obviously that exists on other platforms, but the opportunity is actually leveraging and getting the best out of YouTube. There's tons of creator content that usage rights need to open up. That could generate so much opportunity organically, and we've paid for brands to lean into. And so when we talk about bring, it's bringing those assets over and making sure that you're opening and accessing the audiences that live and breathe across Google's ecosystem as well. Then from a build perspective, this is the part where it's okay. So how do we help work with partners, to ultimately build a creator partnership from the ground up? And so for us, when we talk about infrastructure, one of the most fundamental parts that we've been doing is twofold. Is how do we put the YouTube creator data into the right platforms, the right kind of data platforms that exist in the industry, to make sure that YouTube creators are actually sourced and found. We're putting all the right insights and data into the industry, and so that's been a really important part for us. We've just recently released the YouTube Creator Partnerships tool, which again is now in DV360 and Google Ads, and it's gone fully global. What that allows is for partners, advertisers to ultimately start to find the right creators, make those connections, and ultimately build that creator partnership from the ground up. And so as part of that, yes, we have that infrastructure in our own proprietary, DV360 and Google Ads, but we've also just opened up the API. So again, working with partners in the industry to make sure that YouTube creators are discoverable, and that's a big part of the kind of build component. And then Boost is ultimately making sure that the creator content that's been produced is given the best opportunity to deliver across all of the objectives that a business wants to achieve. And I feel like that's a great opportunity of how I was trying to simplify, bring, build, and boost.
I like how simple the bring, build, boost is, especially given it's paired with this infrastructure that you've built, from having the APIs that you just mentioned to the long form content, the short form content, as well as CTV. What does having that entire infrastructure unlock?
I mean, it's delivering business results. And we're seeing this firsthand. We're getting a wave of case studies and kind of results come through. But let's use demand gen as an example. When creator content is leveraging demand gen, we're seeing 20% increase in conversions. And we're seeing phenomenal results, depending on the business objective. Creator content is incredibly powerful. And I think the opportunity here is to ensure that, one, creators are given their voice, but it's leveraging the creators' channel, the creators' audiences, and then boosted, throughout the AI-powered ecosystem. That then gives the opportunity for it to deliver the best results. And this is the part where, there's a brand that we've worked with recently, end up seeing 23% increase in awareness. This is a food brand in the UK, and ended up delivering phenomenal results and has come back to the table to want to do more. And I feel like this is the point where we now, as an industry, really at the point of proving and scaling. And this is the point of I guess, to your question.
You spoke to earlier about moving away from just having activations and really being integrated. That's the theme of this episode, from bolt-on to built-in. Is that what things like bring, build, boost unlocks? Is it more work? Is it them coming back? Is this them wanting to do retainers? Is that the core thing?
Well, from my point of view, yes, it's about changing the way that investment in influencer works. And if you think about it from a client's point of view, there are a few things that will govern whether they decide to invest. So how functionally easy is it to put money into it as a channel is obviously an important one. How scalable is it? So how much investment can this hold before I start to get diminishing returns? And how measurable is it? So if I spend my money here rather than there, can I demonstrate that I've extracted more value from it? And if you think about bring, build, boost, you've got in that a system that is repeatable, it's connected, and it's scalable. So we are more generally talking about making influencer investable. I think things like this raise the ceiling and they broaden out the walls, if you like, and it becomes a more investable channel as a result.
Of that. Before coming into the boat, we were briefly talking about how Cannes has changed over the last few years and how influencer and influence has been a changing topic. 5 years ago, it was like this wild, wild west. We don't really want to touch that. Then now being the main thing. You've got creator beaches, you've got all these setups, events centered around influencers. You have 500 creators.
500 YouTube creators here this week. At YouTube, we've actually got the YouTube Creator Club, which is an amazing opportunity for creators to spend time with the teams at YouTube. But they have an area dedicated to go and create content, engage and learn. We have a brand deals desk for them to understand how to do brand deals, what does best practice look like. And so I think, the creators loving it because they're recognizing, at YouTube, we really are supporting the creator economy on their side as well as trying to bring the brands into the conversation as well. So I think this is a massive shift. We're seeing it firsthand, and it's exciting.
What I find quite useful is when trying to look at these shifts, you can pull from, I'm a bit of a nerd, so excuse me, you can pull from economic theory. There's this concept called diffusions of innovation, which helps you understand how markets or products are adopted over time. And so you can look at influencer marketing grew 3x in the last 5 years. It's going to grow another 4x in the next 5, which is just wild. So like the growth that we've experienced in the last 3 years felt huge. It's going to grow even more, and the scale that we're already at is going to feel quite extreme. And when you map that across this diffusion of innovation, it shows you that influencer marketing moved from this early adopters, innovators era to early mainstream back in 2023. And you can feel that because it moved from this influence as a channel to actually influencers propagating everywhere. It's more of a strategy. When you map against that, it actually says that by 2028 we would be moving into late stage mainstream, which is typically when a market has no tolerance for a lack of governance anymore. It is becoming a material budget for every company in the world. And so we really have 18 months, according to my math, we might already be there for most brands actually, where governing systems are required. Like you cannot operate. You've got 8-9 figure budgets. It's absolutely needed. And I like that you touched on the need for simplicity, but also like operationalizing that, making it scalable. And so it's interesting that what typically happens when you enter into early mainstream before you get into late is that you have all these proxy frameworks and people are trying to stitch things together that work, but it's clearly working at a scale. You're saying 20% growth in demand, in conversions that you're seeing through that.
It's I think when you take a step back and you reflect on it, I guess creator marketing is at an inflection point.
Yeah.
You know, creators are no longer fighting for attention, they're winning it. And I think the journey that we're going to see, as you mentioned with that timeline, is basically the whole infrastructure, the ecosystem is moving at such a pace that, you know, we're all on this journey together. But, you know, what's as part of that, the governance, the measurement, you know, we've got to make sure that we're supporting industries where some things are a little bit more challenged, should we say, around governance, especially around pharmaceutical and, finance, those types of industries need better guidance as well to support creators as well. So I feel like when you start to bring all that together, there's lots of work for us to do as an industry, but it's incredibly exciting in the sense of where we can see the next 18 months has the potential to lead to.
I'd love to go to discover, create, measure. We've touched on that somewhat, and you said it sort of interlinks somewhere between the bring, build, boost as well. I'd love for that to be unpacked, but how do Google and Goat come together to prove and improve the power of influence using discover, create, measure?
So I think our partnership is ultimately built on the fact that, you know, we're trying to build creator partnerships and deliver marketing objectives, right? And so if we go through those components, it's how do we at YouTube support partners like Goat discover and find the right creators? You know, how do we support with the right insights and data to help validate them? You know, when that brief comes in, how do we find the right YouTube creator for the right campaign for the right moment? And so that's absolutely critical. Following that is how do we support the team and all of the account teams, you know, at partners like Goat, is like follow best practice. What does that look like on YouTube? And, you know, making sure from a create perspective, you know, creator partnerships can take different forms on YouTube, you know, lo-fi, hi-fi, you know, different variations of a specific campaign type right the way through to a deep integrated episodic style piece of content, right? But when we're talking about create, it's how do we help as a platform come to the table with best practice, recommendations, guidance on that create component, because it's trying to find a balance. I see a panel yesterday with some creators and they were just like, brands, please leave us alone, like, you know, give us the creative guidance. But there was that 20-30% like, okay, we recognize that we're doing brand deals and we've got to recognize that we have to operate in certain, you know, elements of understanding what the brand needs. So it's finding that balance. So that's a big part of the create piece, and obviously Boost and Measure is working very closely with the teams across Goat and WPP to ensure that ultimately we are delivering on the right marketing objective, but really, really importantly, having the right measurement structure, you know, identifying what is the hypothesis that we want to uncover, but what's, you know, how are we leveraging, you know, Google search lift to understand intent, how are we leveraging brand lift, and what does that ultimately look like in delivering the business objective, you know, and the goals that we're looking to achieve. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that it's an interesting point you mentioned, influencers sort of wanting creative freedom from brands, which they have always said, and I can completely understand why. But I think there's an interesting sort of
way of running that process backwards, because if you're a brand or you're an agency speaking with your client and you want to encourage them to open up creative freedom, or you want to encourage them to work with a certain type of influencer, you've got to come back to measurement. So you've got to be able to say to them, look, when we do it this way, when we grant creative freedom, when we are more diverse or more perhaps unpredictable in our choices of influencers, and we sort of stretch things slightly, the content that they create performs better, but it has a better impact on your brand. It accomplishes the objective that you're setting out to achieve. So clients win when we can prove things, but actually I think influencers will win as well, because you'll have the data, the rigor and the sophistication that clients are looking for to say, okay, I believe that this works. That unlocks trust for influencers, but it also unlocks investment.
When you spoke about the example of within tennis, you had the 100 tennis fans, you had the tennis players, you had your granddad, all the other things. Navigating a message across them, if you give them complete creativity and complete creative freedom, it also has the risk of creating a confusing message. Right? So let's say the data that we have shows us, we know that if we anchor this association with this community, it doubles the conversions. If we anchor this association with that community, it doubles that. Are there best practices that you use in these frameworks to manage that at scale? Like, how have you gone about making sure that you use the insights that you have to push a message that you're confident in, which is an element of control, whilst also allowing them to have a lot of freedom? Because that's a real art and science to that, right?
You're right, it is both an art and a science. And I think that the key, you were talking about messages resonating with certain communities, things being really important, to be consistent, and then what can be tailored. That's a really important step, because it gives you the guidelines to understand where you can be flexible and where you can't be flexible, and what has to be consistent and what can be varied. I do think when we talk about the future of marketing more generally, there is going to be more customization. So it's more likely that owning tennis, from my point of view as a consumer of that content, might look different from Chris's. So I think that there will always, and increasingly in fact, be more customization with those messages. But if you can go back to the data and say, okay, everything has to communicate this, otherwise we're going to confuse ourselves. But actually, we can talk, you know, people who play the game are going to get a different message from people who watch the game. And, you know, the going to the event is going to have slightly different messaging to people talking about the stats and the player profiles and things like that. You can rationalize it. You're right, though, Max, to say it's an art and a science, because it can't be open season. Everybody just says, well, I like tennis in completely different ways. But I think basing it in the data and understanding where the messaging sits across communities is the way to do it. Because I think how it's been done in the past, and many people will have experienced this, is that because we don't know how much we can flex a message, we over-restrict it. And that restriction affects creativity, and that affects performance.
We touched on a few different metrics that you can measure. I wonder, search lift, brand lift, incrementality, MMM, how do they all ladder up to something that a CFO can act on?
So I think the opportunity, over the next 18 months and as an industry is kind of how do we get to this point where creative marketing is more of a predictable science, right? How do we deliver that economic blueprint of this investment into these 10 creators and, owning the moment is going to deliver a specific business outcome that's much more of how this is going to drive the kind of bottom line, right? So I think 100%, search lift is there to support, understanding intent signals and that, intent of driving discovery to go and purchase something. Likewise, the different brand lift solutions we have at Google. But I think as well, the more that we can partner with, folks like yourselves, is like actually, how do we start going a layer beneath that of actually, okay, so how do we ensure that creative marketing is much more effectively brought out in MMMs? How do we work together to go back to that, predictable science route? Because I think that's where we're going to see a huge, that's when the big shift is really going to come into play.
Something that you spoke to there was that it's not just the measurement of it, but it's actually really understanding the system and being able to govern it. Is that something that you're seeing in the conversations that you're having? It's not just about, we know it's worth this, but we've got frameworks to make sure we can capture risks, we can double down on what works.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, again, you come back to the idea of investment and scale. Somebody like Fernando Fernandez at Unilever saying he wants 20 times as much influencer activation. You have to have a robust and quick system for identifying that something works or something doesn't work. Because if you're doing 20 times as much work with influencers and you don't find out that something is ineffective for 2 weeks, then you've bought a huge amount of ineffective content.
Yeah.
Right. So
you have a negative impact as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you sort of every month look at the numbers and go, oh, that was a disaster, you've lost so much ground. You could have even hurt yourself. So yes, it's really important to have systems in place that spot what's good and what's bad, but also to make decisions about what you're going to do with that content next. We talk about influence everywhere, and there's so many formats and possibilities available in the YouTube ecosystem as well, to make a much smarter decision. Say this piece of content needs to go into another place because it has the potential, it communicates certain messages particularly well, and then we use AI potentially to edit that content in some way to make it fit. But those are the systems that keep the money working hard, really, which is what we need to be doing for clients.
I've got a bit of context and a question that might be a spanner and we can delete it if it doesn't work out, but I think it could be really interesting, so I'm going to try it. It was, we had Boston Consulting Group on this week, and the way in which they look at levers are different to how we have at ThisThat been doing it in the past, and I'm now thinking I need to change how we do things. So when we give you levers, currently we give you levers across creative, targeting, and distribution. So we give you advice on change the messaging this way on the creative or whatever that might be, or these concepts work, these don't. On the distribution, this is the role of organic, paid, this creator, this platform. And then targeting is like age, gender, demographics, things that you could typically target with paid boosting. With content being shown to you based more on your interest, and the platforms being driven and pushing out interest, targeting seems to no longer be based on just age and gender, and the way in which they're looking at making recommendations is creative distribution and what they call demand spaces. It's basically like segments, which like category entry points. So let's say it's tennis. Maybe it could be, I like to play tennis when I am at home with my family. I like to play tennis in the summer. I like to play tennis when I'm on holiday. So those would be like, you segment different communities by entry points into the category. Is that something that you can choose creators on and you can work with creators on? Is that something you could use for paid boosting? Is that something that we could...
So yeah, within creator boosting, one of the things, as long as you've got that the brand partner access, so you've got that digital handshake between the brand and the creator. Yeah. One of the things we're starting to do is ultimately then start to understand, okay, so who are the audiences that have been engaging in that specific piece of content? Yeah. How do we then basically build an audience list on the back of that, and then follow the consumers on a journey?
Oh, amazing.
And then when you couple that with certainly at Google, like all the AI-powered signals we've got from an audience perspective, and the way that we can help go after specific, audience intent-led audiences, there's so much potential that really starts to connect that. I think the bit that ultimately will grow further, I think, in this space is how we build the systems to ultimately make this much more accessible. This will allow us to scale up so much faster as well. And I think brands will very quickly see the impact of what this delivers on business results too. And we're seeing it firsthand. Certainly with everything we're doing is like we know this works, and this is delivering incredible results. And when you start to couple that together, following the frameworks we've mentioned, that's when it's incredibly powerful.
And it's this virtuous cycle that you need to keep looping in, and that's why I find that fascinating. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think that point around interest spaces and points of entry rather than demographic criteria is so true when you said that, because if you talk to an influencer and you say what's your channel about, they don't say, oh, it's really for middle class men aged 30 to 40. It's just that's what it's all about. It's about an interest, right? So that is what you can frame your point of entry around, and I think that brands will come to realise that. And it's not that I think that brands are doing something wrong. It's that things have become more sophisticated, things have become more signal based, which is probably how we would talk about basically the same thing. And the tools in the toolbox that brands have got are built around demography. They're built around scale publishers. So sort of, I need to find the publisher who can hit this many people of this type. And so that's the way that they're used to investing. But if you think about an influencer, it's just such a solid connection to that idea of points of entry and points of interest.
I love it. This also speaks to, I really enjoy how you're both talking about communities. And I love coming back to that tennis example over and over again. We'll move to part 4, which is very neatly connected to this. Influence everywhere. What does that need? So, influence everywhere is GOAT's promise. Investing at the scale of everywhere, think now 8-9 figure budgets, tens or hundreds of millions, requires governance. Have we, the industry, got a system to empower this? Have we got with the bring, build, boost, discover, create, measure? Is that sufficient? Is there something else that we're overlooking? What does the governing system of influence truly look like to make influence investable?
It's a big question. Look, I think from a YouTube and a Google perspective, I think, look, all we can do as a platform, right, is make sure that we're building the right infrastructure, we're supporting the creators, the creator economy, we're helping ensure proving the value, and we're building the processes and the kind of, as I said, the infrastructure to really help drive this through, work closely with all the partners in the industry to kind of work on this journey together. I think the framework around Bring, Build, Boost is really there to help simplify that. And I think that's the key for us, is like how can we help marketers, agencies, partners in the ecosystem, like understand how can you effectively get the best out of creative partnerships on YouTube. The build component, there's a lot to that, right? And so this is where we really have, it's absolutely critical that we work with the partners in the industry to make all of this possible.
I think simplicity is so important, and you spoke to that. Like, governance is ultimately about a framework in which you make decisions, and decision fatigue is a real thing. If you put someone through a 200-step process, it's just not going to happen. And you can't be nimble, you can't be reactive. Like, things happen with that, you have to be able to respond. So I think that is really, really important.
I think as well we're going to see like continued developing workflows across the way that we speak about this, but like how do we take sometimes what is an incredibly what can be quite a long process of getting the brief, working with the creators, deciding on a specific measurement hypothesis plan, contracting, if a retail client needs to send a product out, like there's so many steps, and then we haven't even gotten to measurement, and it's like, that's a lot. So when we're talking about making it investable and we have to make sure that marketers and advertisers are fully comfortable in understanding that we're building the right workflows, and as a platform, this is something we deeply care about.
Maybe bringing back to the timeline of the next 18 months before we go into late stage mainstream. If we're to look at that tension between rigor and simplicity, what would you say the industry needs to do over the next 18 months to make sure we get there?
So, from my point of view, if we think about influence everywhere as a description of where we're trying to get to. It requires us to be able to move influencer content, influencer messaging into lots of different places. That's not just platforms and formats, but across channels. Take it into the real world, adapt it and move it into different places altogether. So from that point of view, and I think what Chris said there was really important, you have to be able to simplify the process, because if you want to own tennis, here we are again, but you want to have influencer content on the digital out of home screen at the exit of the tube station nearest to where the tennis is being played, if you don't simplify, you've just made months and months of work, because these systems stack up on top of each other. So what we really need to do, I think, is stop treating, you said it earlier, Max, stop treating influencer as a channel, because then as soon as you want to do something else, you're then having another channel conversation, and it just builds like this, and start treating it as a way of communicating with an audience. Collapse that complexity as much as you possibly can, and that's how we're going to spread out and be more present in more places.
I love that. Is that the underlying premise of influence everywhere, that now influence can be on every channel? It's beyond channels.
Absolutely, yes. So we believe that everything comes back to the principle that content from a human is more engaging, as long as it's a human who's relevant to you. And if that's true, then where that content sits and where you encounter it shouldn't be a barrier. And so we believe that if you can break all of that down, and if a piece of content is relevant to me, the right person to tell that story is going to be telling it, and I can encounter that anywhere from the end of this podcast to when I land by my flight this evening. That's what Influence Everywhere is really about, and it contributes to a system of influence that the brands are going to adopt, and that's how they're going to communicate with audiences. It's all going to plug together. That cannot happen unless we simplify and reduce the complexity in systems.
Yeah. So is it maybe then over the next 18 months, it's not actually necessarily building something new, it's just running with what we see as simple and working right now, and just tweaking it, getting playbooks to prove it works, to make the investment case of, we've only 20% now already, we keep doing this, now it's 23%, now it's 25%.
100%. I think we're going to be making, as an industry, we'll be making those incremental tweaks, but then at the same time, I think, we've talked about measurement already today, but I think measurement, if we look to your question, that is going to be a fundamental part of, as an industry, we want to really lean into as well. At YouTube, we're heavily leaning into this now, wanting to understand the effectiveness of creator marketing, what is the bottom line ROI of creator marketing, and what do these creator partnerships actually do? We're talking about owning a moment and those big cultural moments. The opportunity here is, okay, so how do we holistically measure that impact? Looking at organic and paid, what does that halo effect actually deliver for business results? And I think that's the thing that is really exciting. Certainly marketers that we speak to this week is this is where we're on that journey now.
Brilliant. Gents, I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll go through to the rapid fire. If there was one thing that we as a group could be working on to help move the industry forward, let's say over the next 18 months, something that doesn't yet exist, what would that be?
I would say that, in fact, I have been saying in a lot of the meetings this week, is that I believe clients want to make one decision. They want to try and accomplish a specific business outcome. They've got an objective, and they don't want all of the subsequent decisions, how much of it should be brand messaging, how much of it should be influencer, how much of it should be shorts. These things do not serve the purpose necessarily. They're not built to serve the purpose of the challenge that the client is solving. So what I would love us to be able to do is to start to build solutions as an industry around business objectives. So everything that we do, we can rationalize, we can prove, is designed to fit that objective. And how many influencers, how many micro influencers, which countries they live in, all this kind of stuff, these become less sort of barriers to making it happen, because we're able to prove that all the choices we're making, we can demonstrate that all of those campaign choices, all of those casting choices, creative choices, will drive you to that outcome. So at the moment, I think that we are set up as an industry to explain all of the tiny choices we make, whereas instead I would like to see us start to talk about business outcomes.
I like this, like, connected tissue is what's really missing there, I suppose, right? It's like the integrations are a really powerful step forward for that. Because to make it as simple as that, you need to understand how they all connect, how they're all driving each other, such that what are the two things that if you focus on those, or the one thing that if you do, drives 80% of the rest.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier on with the predictable science, right?
Yeah.
And this is, it's important. Partners like yourselves are a massive part of this within the creator economy, right? Of being able to kind of validate everything Tom just said, but with the specific data points that, okay, so who are the specific micro creators that we can forecast and ultimately predict are going to help deliver a specific business outcome. That's going to be really cool when we get to that. We've got, as an industry, I think, some work to do to collectively to really help prove and scale that out. But I think we're on that journey, and I think at YouTube we're seeing this day in, day out with the impact that creators of all sizes are having on delivering business outcomes. When you start to partner that together with these incredibly creative and really exciting creative partnerships, I think that's the stuff that we're most looking forward to now.
Predictable science. That's it in a nutshell, I think.
There's maybe like an undertone to it of like conviction. That is like conviction to make one call, and it's the defensibility, the confidence thing. The predictable science really needs to be rigorous enough to be able to make one decision.
Yeah.
And keeping that in mind, I mean, I can completely understand it, because without the ability to justify a choice against the business outcome, all of those decisions become difficult to make. It's decision paralysis, as you were saying. Why have we chosen that influencer? Why have we asked them to create that piece of content? How long do I need the rights for? Which markets do I need the rights for? There is no predictive engine, automated engine, that will just help you decide how to make all of those choices because you've told it that you need a certain outcome. So having the confidence to say, don't worry about how many influencers it's going to be or what formats we're going to use, because the choices we make will be governed by this predictive ability to get you where you need.
So if we were to answer, how does influence go from bolt-on to built-in, would the keywords be predictable science?
I would go with that. I think that's where we've netted out on this one.
I love that.
Should we all go home? Have we
We solved it, yeah.
All right, guys, I've got a rapid fire this or that questions series. Are we ready? I think you'll laugh at the first one. Influencer as a channel or influence as a strategy?
Influence as a strategy, please.
I mean, I think we covered that one.
Effectiveness or influence?
Effectiveness.
Yeah, effectiveness.
I've got a bit more work to do on that one then. I see effectiveness as really important. I guess I haven't really explained my view on what influence is. So I see influence as the incremental lifetime sales that come from a campaign or from an activation. And I see that as both the effectiveness of an ad, then the ripple effect of the effectiveness that has on the community. And so from that framing, I think effectiveness is a subset of what we need to be optimizing for. I think in this world in which advertising is losing control of brand and communities are gaining control of brand, we need to get better at understanding how we can influence people. The thing that has made influencer marketing so powerful, the essence of it, influence, is a thing that we need to master. And that it includes effectiveness, but it goes one level deeper to understand what is the cascading ripple effect. How does that sit?
I mean, I think it's incredibly powerful, right? And I think that's when you start to bridge together, ultimately effectiveness is so important, right? This is an absolute priority for brands and marketers to understand the effectiveness of their marketing and the investment, right? But I love the kind of the impact on the community and that influence piece. I think that's going to be an exciting development for where we're going, right?
I think we're talking about framing around that, because
Yeah.
the ripple effect, the long-term impact, perhaps is the word, the sort of legacy of the choice that you've made. That is vitally important. To me, I think when you say effectiveness versus influence, I'm thinking about effectiveness as applied influence. So it's all very well being influential, but what you want to do is leverage that influence to generate an effect.
Yes.
So yeah, I think the ability to use influence as a tool to generate an effect is what I think brands want to do.
It's all around language. It's really important. Conversion or community?
I'm going to say community because it's the heart of YouTube.
I'm going to say conversion because we're just coming at it from different sides. But again, it's connection. I think we would work back from the outcome, right? That might mean you need to build a community, but conversion for me.
What about brand lift or MMM?
MMM.
I'm going to be controversial. I'm going to say brand lift.
But you know what, right? Is that they both say this or that. I mean, it's really hard on this one because they both play an incredibly important role in this, defining success at a campaign level, at an investment level. I feel like that's a tough one, Max. Yeah.
Especially when you start next to someone that's got a brand.
I know. But I will come at this from a I guess from a Google perspective of we always would look at business outcomes, and MMMs are such a fundamental part of that. But there's no denying, right, is that looking at brand lift, search lift, all of the components and uplift solutions that exist, they all intertwine, they all connect and help ultimately fuel the output and improve those outcomes.
The system for predictable science.
I said brand lift partly because I'm sitting next to you and you've invited me on a yacht, but also I think influencer plays in the long term, and I think that right now brands are seeing influencer as a way to manage that transition. You said brands are losing less control of a brand and it's becoming democratized, or people are owning it, and I think people see influencer as a really important part of that mix. So right now I would be talking to clients about influencer's effect on your brand. They're safe hands. You trust them with a message, they can build your brand.
I love that.
Yeah, that was a tough one. It's really hard.
He's not going to invite you back.
I know, that's it, right? I was sort of thinking, hold on a minute.
You're allowed to say both.
But
Doesn't have
both
to
is
one.
the answer then. Yeah.
Community strategy or media plan?
Well, working for WPP Media, media plan.
I have to say both, because ultimately, again, from a YouTube perspective, it's community strategy and media plans, they work hand in hand in terms of delivering the business outcomes.
Where would you start? Would you start with the media plan and then think about the community strategy, or would you think of the community strategy and then go to the media plan?
I think Tom, would be good to get your thoughts on this, but I feel like the community strategy is certainly that kind of, if you look at the kind of process of it, is fundamentally becoming more and more important of the journey.
Yeah, you're right. Things sort of end up connected back to each other in the end. When we talk about a media plan, what we are really saying is how the client is going to invest their spend in media. What they might invest in influencers for is a way to build a community. So I think the way that media plan helps from the point of view that I'm coming at is that it sort of sets out everywhere that you can put your money. It gives you the picture of your investment, and it starts to outline the purposes of those investments. And I think that's a really interesting and important place for influencer to sit. I think it gives us the ability to justify what we think clients should spend and what they should spend it on. I would say a community strategy is potentially how we're going to use influencers, but fundamentally, let's make sure we've got a place on the media plan.
One last question. Science or instinct?
Science.
This is another one we've answered.
It's science for me. I do think there's a role for instinct, but predictable science.
Predictable science, yeah.
Chris, Tom, thank you so much. This is an amazing podcast.
Thanks for having
Thanks
us.
so
Really
much for
enjoyed it,
having
Max.
us.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.